Hi, I'm Jerry Sparks, president of AG Financial Insurance Solutions, and I have with us again Rich Hammar, renowned attorney, author, and all-around good guy to help us with a really exciting Risk Management Live. As you know, we've been called being on the cutting edge with lawsuits and talking about court findings and stuff like that. And most people know that, remember the Virginia Tech shooting, and where 32 students were killed and others were injured. And two of the victims' families sued the university and the state, and actually a jury awarded $4 million to each family. However, it went to the Supreme Court. And what did the Supreme Court actually come in and say? What were the findings of the Supreme Court?
Well, Jerry, as you know, I read every case decided in this country involving religious organizations, and it turns out that that's about 1,000, roughly 1,000 a month. And a lot of times there really are no cases that I see on a day-to-day basis that really strike me as being very significant. But I remember a month or two ago I was reading cases, and I came across this case involving Virginia Tech, and I said, wow, this case has direct relevance to churches, because so many church leaders, you know, you see a media attention focused on a shooting at your local mall, at a school, at a university campus, wherever it may be, sometimes even churches. And one of the issues that church leaders wrestle with is, do we need to respond to this risk at our church? Are we going to be liable legally? Can victims of armed assailants on our premises, let's say they kill people, can the families of those victims sue our church? Is our church liable? And so I see this happen many times. Church leaders have this feeling that they have to institute heroic measures to protect against armed assailants because they fear legal liability if they don't. And so this case, I think, as many of the issues that we cover in Risk Management Live, it demonstrates how we try to stay on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
And so we're not covering issues that happened 10 years ago. This is something that happened weeks ago. This particular ruling. So, you know, what happened in the Virginia Tech case, there, as you point out, there were 32 people, students mostly, killed by this armed assailant. Unthinkable, unspeakable, incomprehensible to us. You may remember that. It happened in April of 2007. And we all were stunned as we saw the media accounts of this senseless shooting, and many others were injured. Well, as you might expect, there were lawsuits that were filed against the university and the state, which operated the university. It was a state agency. And the first of these cases was resolved recently by the Virginia Supreme Court. Now, the trial court in this case had ruled that the university was liable for these shootings and awarded $4 million to each of two families. The lawsuit was brought by the families of two of the victims, two of the 32 fatalities. And the jury awarded $4 million to each one and said that the university was liable for what happened. Well, the university appealed, and the state Supreme Court in Virginia reversed and ruled that the university was not liable. And they said that because of the issue of foreseeability. And they quoted a legal treatise that's known as the Restatement of Torts that's recognized in all 50 states. And there's a provision in there that it's called Section 314A that says this in part: a property owner is not liable where he neither knows nor should know of an unreasonable risk. He is not required to take precautions against a sudden attack from a third person which he has no reason to anticipate. And so the court looked at all the facts of this case exhaustively and concluded that the university simply, it was not foreseeable that somebody was going to kill 32 people with various firearms on their premises. So that was the ruling of the case. And the court, I guess you might say, looked at the issue of foreseeability, and they focused on 4 factors. And this is very relevant. And this is based right on an article I wrote for my Church Law and Tax Report newsletter on, and I've written a couple articles over the last few years on whether a church needs a security guard or how should you respond to armed assailants on your premises. And I've made the point in those articles that churches generally are not going to be legally responsible for shootings on their premises if they're not foreseeable. And that's exactly what the Virginia Supreme Court concluded. And the 4 factors that the Virginia Supreme Court looked at in deciding if a shooting at the university was foreseeable were as follows. Number 1, whether any criminal conduct had occurred on or near the university property. Number 2, how recently it had occurred. Number 3, how similar those criminal acts were to what happened in this instance. And number 4, was there publicity given to those previous acts so that the property owner knew that they occurred? So let's go through those again, because this is vital to the Virginia Supreme Court's ruling in assessing the liability of the university for the armed assailants' actions. So again, this is what you need to think about. This is what the courts are going to apply in deciding if your church is legally liable for the acts of an armed assailant who is on your premises. Number 1, did criminal conduct occur on or near your property? Number 2, how recently that conduct occurred? Number 3, how similar that criminal conduct was to the shooting that occurred on your premises? And number 4, what publicity was given to those previous actions so that you knew that this had happened? And let me just summarize, Jerry, I think this is interesting, what the courts have said about foreseeability. Let me refer to some cases where a criminal assault on a landowner's premises was deemed to be foreseeable. So there was legal liability for the property owner, whether it was a for-profit or nonprofit organization. So let me just run through some notable cases. 10 times within the past 3 years, that was foreseeable, that a similar crime had occurred. These all involved violent assaults. 394 times within the past 2 years. I mean, that's unbelievable. Can you imagine? Yeah, within a block of our church, we've had 394 armed assaults in the last 2 years. Yeah, you better believe that becomes a foreseeable action on your premises. How about 40 times within the past year? Again, and this is all happening in the vicinity of your church, not a mile away, but in the vicinity of your church, within a block, maybe a 2-block radius in these cases. Or how about 85 assaults within the past 3 years? Or 7 times within the past year? Or 75 to 100 incidents within the past 3 years? Those are some typical cases. Now, on the other hand, there have been a number of cases, just like the Virginia Supreme Court, in which the courts have concluded that armed assaults were not foreseeable, and so the property owner was not liable for the damages and the injuries and the deaths that occurred. Let me mention some of those. An apartment owner was not liable for a criminal assault on a tenant because no violent crimes had occurred on the premises. Or how about this? A sexual assault on a female customer in a parking garage was unforeseeable in light of only 17 previous crimes over the past 10 years. Well, obviously that case could go either way probably. Or how about this? A bank could not foresee an assault at one of its ATMs based on 2 previous assaults within the 8 preceding years. Or an assault at a grocery store was not foreseeable because no assaults had ever occurred in the store. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. You kind of get a sense, I think, don't you, that when you're looking at this critical issue of foreseeability, were there similar crimes, violent assaults, on or near your premises within the recent past that you were aware of? That's the key. And we're not talking about one incident a mile away. That's not going to be foreseeable. What about one violent assault within a block in the past year? That's in the gray area. But a lot of cases, I think, are very clear. We've never had a violent assault occur within 4 or 5 blocks of our church that we researched and we're aware of. Then, obviously, the risk of liability, the concept of foreseeability is greatly diminished. So that is according to the Virginia Supreme Court, that's the critical factor in deciding liability, whether it be Virginia Tech, whether it be your church. Do you have a legal liability if an armed assailant comes onto your premises and injures or kills people? I have done a lot of research in this area, and I did an article in my Church Law and Tax Report newsletter recently where I updated my research looking at shootings over the previous 15 years from 1998 to 2013 involving fatalities on church premises. It turns out there are 27 of these shootings. And let me just go over some of the conclusions. How were these resolved? Well, the shooter committed suicide in 10 cases. The shooter was arrested by police in 13 cases. The shooter was killed by police in 4. What was the possible motive of the shooter in these cases? It was unknown in 10. It was a domestic dispute in 7. What about, was the shooter a church member? And the answer was no in 22 of those 27 cases, yes in 5. Had the shooter, I think this is significant, had the shooter made prior threats to the church? I'm going to kill people on your premises. And the answer was no in 26 out of the 27 cases. Only 1 was there a threat. Obviously, a threat really ratchets this up in terms of foreseeability. Did the shooting occur during church services? Yes in 17 out of 27, no in 10. So that kind of gives you the lay of the land in terms of these cases, and I think helps with the issue of foreseeability. And let me also say this, that even if it's foreseeable that a violent assault could take place at your church because of similar crimes on or near your property in the recent past, what are you going to do about it? Well, what kind of preventive measures can be instituted? And many courts have said it's impossible. No matter what precautions you take, a dedicated assailant is going to overcome those obstacles. In fact, some of these 27 church shootings, there were extensive precautions that had been implemented by the church. I'm thinking of one where they actually even had metal detector at the front door. The person just blew right past it and within a few seconds was in the sanctuary shooting. How are you going to stop this? It's literally impossible. And so we could say that, yes, we need to have armed police officers in our lobby, and that's fine, but even that is not going to prevent a dedicated assailant from shooting. So, but the issue really that we're focusing today is on the liability of the church. And I just want you to know that if you think that you need to institute extensive precautions to protect against armed shooting because of a fear that your church is going to be liable if you don't, well, we've covered that issue today, that your liability is based on the foreseeability of these horrible incidents happening. And I've given you the 4 factors that the courts apply in deciding if an incident is foreseeable or not. Now, having said all that, so even if you're in the category of most churches where it's simply, these incidents are not foreseeable, and the fact that they happen around the country, we've had 27 cases in the last 15 years, just in a generalized sense, that does not make it foreseeable that a shooting is going to take place at your facility. It has to be similar crimes on or near your premises for it to be foreseeable in your church. So, but I want to emphasize that even if maybe there's not a legal duty in your church to institute significant precautions, protective measures, that doesn't mean you don't do it. And this is an important point because I think churches are held not just to a legal standard, but to a theological or ethical standard. It's more than any other entity, more than a McDonald's or a Walmart. I mean, we view people very differently as people that are made in the image of God, that are of infinite value and worth and deserve our protection, even if we're not legally required. In other words, there's a higher law, Jerry, that applies to churches. And because we see people differently than Walmart. You know, they see a person, that's a potential consumer, a purchaser of our products and services, and they track them. And in various ways, but that person is an economic advantage to us. Churches see this very differently. These are people of infinite worth, made in the image of God, and they deserve our protection. I'm all for it, instituting protective measures, but I just want you to know that as a legal proposition, it probably, in most, if not many, if not most cases, is not required.
You know, actually in Virginia Tech, they actually had their own police force on campus. And one of the things that we actually suggest with our churches, if they want to have people with a weapon or something, is that they use uniformed police officers. However, even that measure did not prevent the Virginia Tech shooting. So
they had dozens of police officers on that campus. And that's exactly right. I mean, that is kind of the highest form of protection, really, isn't it? That you can provide for the people on your premises. And that didn't protect against the shooting. They can't be everywhere.
Right. Let's look at it. Let's just turn the table a little bit. Are there any measures taken that could cause liability from a church instituting, let's say having people with concealed carry weapons opening fire and accidentally shooting somebody?
Yes. Apart from the issue of liability for the acts of an armed assailant, which, as we've seen, in most cases, it's just not going to be there because of the lack of foreseeability. That doesn't mean the church doesn't face potential legal liability, because it can. There haven't been cases involving churches, but there have been many cases involving other types of property owner. It's possible to be liable if you use unqualified people to provide security, and those people use excessive force, or they're incompetent in the use of force. You talked to a church recently where the pastor said everybody in his church had a concealed weapon. Well, think about that. Think about this. If you have an armed assailant stand up and all of a sudden there are 50 guns pointed at him and they start firing, what kind of collateral damage is there going to be? And that's where you get into a very significant risk to the church, and that is you have not controlled the use of lethal force, and you've allowed this situation to happen where innocent bystanders can be killed or injured by the incompetence of concealed weapons permit holders that are shooting at them. You know, I'm a concealed weapons permit holder. I've mentioned in previous broadcasts. I mean, I never bring a gun. I shouldn't say this publicly. I hardly ever bring a gun to church. But the point is, if I see some guy 30 feet away stand up with a gun, am I going to fire at that person when there's all kinds of people in the background? I can't even imagine it. I mean, I would look and say, man, who did I hit? It's just inconceivable. Unless the person's sitting right next to me, maybe, but you have no idea where these people are going to be. So concealed weapons permit holders, I think that can be a component of a reasonable risk management response. But I think a church has a duty to do more than just allow any concealed weapons permit holder to bring guns to church. My church has a process where we vet these people. Yes, they have a concealed weapons permit. That's essential. But then we go beyond that. References. Do we know of any reason why this person maybe we should not allow to carry a weapon? And then we try to limit the number of weapons on the premises. And most importantly, these people work in conjunction with law enforcement. We have uniformed police officers on premises during services. They are the primary force. They work in conjunction with concealed weapons permit holders, and we make sure that those efforts are coordinated. And you know, the uniformed police officers is, to me, the vital component. It's not that expensive to hire these people. You're only going to do it for 1 or 2 services a week in most cases, and it's not that expensive. And it's, I think, an excellent preventive device because the uniform itself is a deterrent. And as these people are highly trained in the use of firearms and response to crisis situations. But probably the most important thing, and we've mentioned this before, is when a police officer responds to criminal conduct, that officer ceases to be an agent of the church that you've hired to provide security and becomes a public law enforcement officer when responding to criminal behavior. And that breaks the link of liability back to your church. That's not true for private security guards. That's not true for concealed weapons permit holders. But it is true for police officers. And that's another reason why I think that's a great response to churches that feel that, maybe we don't have a legal duty to do this, but we feel we have a theological or ethical duty. That's a great way to do it.
We did do a previous seminar on concealed carry, and you're more than welcome to look that up on YouTube and look at the concealed carry video we did. But, you talked about people carrying concealed carry. If the church has a security team and they are allowing them to have have a concealed carry gun, okay, that's when the church actually has liability because they know about it and it's their security team. If you have a lot of people, you just have a lot of people that are carrying guns and you don't ask, don't tell, the church may not have as much liability there because it's not their people and they don't know about it. Mm-hmm. But once they have that knowledge that their security team is doing it, and one of the things you mentioned, and I think I would mention, is that a lot of counties in the state where you're at actually has specific training for county officers, for police officers, and actually what I suggest to churches is that they follow the exact same training that those police officers or county sheriffs go through, because then you're doing the exact same training as what the state goes through to pass them. Also, if you don't allow somebody to carry a gun, you've rejected them. Document it so they know that not everybody that has concealed carry automatically, can carry a gun on the premises. Mm-hmm. You do vet it, and you do make sure that people have minimum standards set to do the concealed carry.
And Jerry, you mentioned, we were talking before the broadcast today about a particular sheriff's department where their view is anybody with a weapon they view as the potential assailant.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was visiting with the sheriff's department, and I said, all right, we have people that have concealed carry, and one of the things that they came up with was, they said, whoever we see have a gun pointed at somebody, we're taking them down. And I said, all right, church security team, what's going to prevent the sheriff's department from shooting our own people? And are you going to be responsible as a church for your security officers because mm-hmm. they're trying to protect, and the police take them down? Mm-hmm. So, it's a whole nother limit of liability. And actually, they came up with identifying their security people.
Now, don't say how.
I will not say how,
yeah.
But identifying their security people when this is happening, and the police department or sheriff's department actually acknowledging it. So,
and that's why it's so important to coordinate your response with your local law enforcement.
Yeah, it's real important when you are setting a policy, number one, that you get them involved. And especially because most of the time you'll have a private security, or you may have an off-duty police officer already working at the church. And it's real important that you coordinate all of your safety with that person. Mm-hmm. I know that when I go actually visit a church, and I'll be visiting a church here in the next week, on concealed carry and that. And we have a person coming in that is actually a retired police officer that kind of controls everything. And between him and I, we help set the policies for the church to help protect that church in case something unforeseeable does happen. Mm-hmm. So the important thing here is, I think, foreseeable. What measures could a church and or school take to prevent this? Really, in 99.9% of the time, there's nothing they could have done to prevent this. And we see this happening, all around. And so, from a liability standpoint, the chances of a church being held liable are very, very slim. but you can take preventive measures. And when you take those preventive measures, the important thing is that you do it in a diligent manner to help protect you from being sued if something does happen with somebody like a concealed carry person shooting somebody else.
With excessive force under the circumstances, or maybe the incompetent use of force because of the person's minimal training. Concealed weapons permit holders there's a vast spectrum of competency. Some are, like me, incompetent. On the other hand, there's some highly competent people. They're former or current law enforcement or military, very adept at using firearms. But that's the thing about these concealed weapons permits. It's such a variety of competencies, and so you just can't assume that anybody that has that permit automatically is qualified to assist with security in a church.
Yeah, actually, I have a cousin that is actually a sheriff, and he does the training for concealed carry. And I mean, if you're at 8 foot and you can hit a target, you're, that is, okay, 8 out of 10 times you need to hit a target that's 8 foot away. Well, that's not really good training. Most of the time that person isn't going to be that close. So doing a little bit more training, as the sheriff's departments do, makes it very good. Do you have any closing remarks in regards to this? I think, the big thing is the Supreme Court has now ruled.
Of Virginia.
And I think that will be extrapolated to other states with the findings, just like the findings on foreseeability. And the cases that you mentioned in foreseeability, I mean, really show that most of the time it is not going to be foreseeable unless you know a specific threats.
Or probably more than one.
Well, yeah.
On or near your premises in recent history.
Yeah, 40 in the last 3 years.
Yeah,
So the chances of this happening are very, very slim, and we're here to protect the church. We're here to protect the people. But this Supreme Court ruling basically confirms what we said in our Concealed Carry Risk Management Live, and we do invite you to go back and take a look at that. So
again, and let me emphasize the point we made, Jerry, that while there may not be a legal duty because of the lack of foreseeability, there may be liability based on other grounds, such as the use of incompetent persons, such as some concealed weapons permit holders, as part of your security response. That can be an independent source of liability. And apart from that, you may feel, and many church leaders do, that there are theological or ethical duties that apply here as well. And so even if we don't have a legal duty to institute measures to protect against armed assailants, we believe we have theological or ethical responsibility to do so. And I heartily agree with that assessment.
I do too. So once again, we appreciate you being here for Risk Management Live. If you have any questions, make sure you email them to us. We're glad to answer them. And Rich, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the next Risk Management Live.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Rich.
Yeah.